I'm 31 years old and I live in Vienna now. I drink my coffee standing by a window that overlooks a tram stop where the same woman in a red coat waits every morning at 7:15. I work long hours. I sleep well most nights. I'm married to a man I chose and who chose me back, and if you saw us on the street, you would think we were like any other couple carrying grocery bags and arguing about whose turn it is to call the landlord. But there is a knight I carry in my chest like a splinter that never worked its way out, not because it destroyed me, because it almost did. And because the woman I was before that night would not recognize the woman sitting here now telling you this, with a baby kicking against her ribs and a letter from her mother-in-law folded into the back of a kitchen drawer, I have never told this story from the beginning, not to friends, not fully, I have told it in pieces. The funny version at dinner parties where I come off sharp and the ending gets a laugh. The quiet version to my sister on the phone, late at night, when I could not stop crying and did not want my husband to hear. But the real version, the one where I was not brave the whole time, the one where I sat in a parking lot afterward and could not feel my hands, that version I have kept to myself until now. My name is Mira Sokolova, and the night before my wedding, my fiancé's mother tried to buy me off at her own dinner table. She failed, but not the way you think. Let me go back. I met Daniil Orlov when I was 26. He was working as a financial consultant for a mid-sized firm that handled compliance for import companies, and I was a multilingual legal coordinator at an international logistics operation. We met at a conference in Frankfurt that neither of us wanted to attend. He was standing by a coffee station looking like he had been awake for 3 days. I asked him in Russian if the coffee was as bad as it looked. He said in Russian that the coffee had given up on life and he respected its honesty. I laughed, and I am not someone who laughs easily at strangers. We dated for 2 years. Daniil was thoughtful, steady, and more intelligent than he let people see. He had this way of listening that made you feel like nothing else in the room existed. He remembered things, not just birthdays and favorite restaurants. He remembered the thing you said once offhand about how your father used to whistle while he cooked, and then months later he would whistle the same song without realizing it, and you would stand in the kitchen doorway feeling something so tender it scared you. He was not perfect. I want to say that clearly because what comes later might make him sound like a coward, and that is not the whole truth. Daniil's flaw was not cruelty or dishonesty, it was silence. He had grown up in a household where conflict was handled by not handling it, where his mother's displeasure was the weather, and everyone else just adjusted their coat. He loved me. I never doubted that. But he had spent 30 years learning that the safest thing to do when his mother spoke was to wait for her to finish. That habit nearly cost him everything we got engaged in the spring. He proposed at home, on a Sunday, while I was reading on the couch in his old university sweatshirt with my hair unwashed, no ring box hidden in champagne, no photographer lurking behind a bush, just Daniil sitting down next to me, holding a ring he had chosen himself and saying, "I do not want to imagine any version of my life that does not have you in it." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small stone that caught light in a way that reminded me of river water. It was not expensive and I did not care. I had paid my own rent since I was 19. I had built my career without a single phone call from a connected uncle or a family friend who knew someone. Everything I owned, I earned. A ring did not need to prove anything to me. It just needed to mean something. And it did. Then the planning began. And with the planning came Elena Viktorovna Orlova, Daniil's mother, a woman who could wound you so precisely with a sentence that you would not feel the cut until hours later, standing alone in your bathroom, replaying what she said, and realizing it had never been a compliment at all. She was never openly cruel.
I want you to understand that. She never raised her voice. She never called me a name. She never said I was not good enough. What she did was worse. She implied it, over and over in a dozen different ways, with a smile that never once reached her eyes. She would say things like, "Mira, you are so brave to wear that color."
Not everyone could carry it. Or, Daniil always admired women with traditional values. I suppose times change. Or, the one that still sits like a stone in my chest. I just want my son to be with someone who understands what it means to maintain a certain kind of life. Maintain, like a marriage, was a house that needed dusting. Like love was a standard of living. I knew what she meant. She meant money. She meant family. She meant that I came from nothing and she came from something, and in her world, that gap was not romantic. It was a liability. Daniil's family was not wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear the word. They did not have yachts or vacation homes. But they had stability, generational stability, the kind that comes from grandparents who owned the right property at the right time, parents who made careful investments, and a social circle where everyone's last name was already known before they walked into a room. The Orlovs had savings, reputation, connections, and the quiet confidence of people who had never once wondered whether the rent check would clear. I had none of that. I grew up with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who left before I could remember his face. I shared a bedroom with my sister until I was 17. I studied on buses, in break rooms, in the back of a laundromat that smelled like bleach and someone else's cigarettes. I learned German because my first employer needed a translator and I needed to not be replaceable. I learned French because the firm expanded. I learned to read contracts the way some people learn to read music. Note by note, clause by clause, until I could hear what was being said underneath the language. None of that mattered to Elena. To her, I was still the girl without a background, the girl who had somehow gotten close enough to her son to be dangerous. During the engagement, her resistance was constant but careful. She questioned the venue. She suggested we postpone. She brought up other women Daniil had dated, not by name, but by description. That lovely girl from the Volkov family, whatever happened with her? She asked me in front of guests, whether I was comfortable in Daniil's world, as though his world was a country and I had arrived without a passport. Daniil noticed some of it. He would say things like, "She does not mean it that way," or "She just needs time," and I would nod, because I loved him, and because I had spent my entire life learning that some battles are not worth the energy it takes to win them. But I was keeping count quietly, the way women do 3 months of planning. Seating charts, floral arrangements, the dress, the caterer, the registry, the guest list that required a diplomat's patience to finalize. I handled most of it. Daniil helped when asked but did not initiate. His mother offered opinions that were not opinions. They were orders dressed in suggestion. And through all of it, I carried something no one knew about. 1 week before the wedding, I was called into my director's office at the firm. Claudia Werner, a woman I respected deeply, a woman who had spent 30 years in international arbitration and never once raised her voice in a courtroom because she never needed to. She closed the door, sat across from me, and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a placement offer, a 2-year position in the firm's European arbitration office in Vienna leadership track. Housing stipend, language support, a salary that made me read the number twice. "You earned this," Claudia said. "No one handed it to you." I stared at that paper for a long time, and I felt something I had not felt in months. Not excitement exactly, something deeper recognition. The feeling of being seen for what you actually are, not for what someone's mother thinks you should be. I did not accept on the spot. I told Claudia I needed a week. And I did not tell Daniil, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew the moment I told him, it would stop being mine. It would become a conversation, then a negotiation, then a family discussion, then something Elena would find a way to twist into evidence that I was selfish, that I was pulling her son away, that I was choosing ambition over devotion. I wanted one quiet moment to sit with that offer and understand what it meant for my life, not for our life. Not for the family, for me, just me. And I do not think that is selfish. I think that is survival. So I tucked the letter into the back of a drawer and kept planning a wedding. Then came the morning before. If you are listening to this in your car right now, or lying in bed, or washing dishes while this plays in the background, I need you to hear what I'm about to tell you, because this is the part where the ground opened up. I woke up early. The apartment was full of boxes and garment bags and a stack of place cards I still needed to sort. My wedding dress hung on the back of the bedroom door in a white bag, and every time I passed it, I touched the zipper like it was a rosary. I was nervous, not about marrying Daniil, about everything around it. At 8:47 in the morning, my phone buzzed, a message from Daniil. "My mom wants you for dinner tonight. She says it is important. I know it is a lot, but it would mean everything if we could all just have one peaceful meal before tomorrow. Please, I read it twice. I set the phone down. I picked it up and read it again. One peaceful meal. That is what he called it. Like peace was something you could serve on a plate next to the salad forks. I knew, the way you know weather is turning before the sky changes, that this dinner was not about peace. Elena did not do peace. She did positioning, she did strategy, she did things that looked generous on the surface and left you bleeding underneath. But I also knew that if I refused, I would spend my wedding day carrying the guilt of being the one who would not try. And Daniil, sweet, hopeful, conflict-allergic Daniil, would look at me with those quiet eyes and wonder why I could not just get through one more evening. So I typed back, "I will be there at 7. And then I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my wedding dress, asking myself whether the woman inside it tomorrow would be someone I recognized. If this story is already pulling you in, do me a favor, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you what happened when I walked through that door. I wore a dark green dress, simple, no necklace, no bracelet, no rings except the engagement band. The only other thing I wore was a pair of small gold earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. She gave them to me the year before she died. She said, "Mira, when you walk into a room where people want to make you feel small, wear something that reminds you where you come from, not where they think you belong." I have worn those earrings into every room that tried to shrink me. Daniil's father, Sergei Petrovich, opened the door. He was a tall man with kind, tired eyes, and the posture of someone who had learned a long time ago that the safest place in his own home was the background. He kissed both my cheeks, took my coat, and said something about how the flowers I had chosen for the wedding were beautiful. It was a small kindness. The kind that costs nothing and means everything when you're walking into a war dressed as a dinner guest. The apartment was immaculate. Linen napkins folded into points, crystal glasses that caught the chandelier light, porcelain plates that looked like they had never touched actual food. Candles on the table, but not the kind that make a room feel warm, the kind that make it feel staged. And at the center of it all, standing beside the table like she had been rehearsing her entrance, was Elena. She smiled when she saw me. It did not reach her eyes, it never did. "Mira," she said, "how lovely. Come sit." Dinner began the way it always did with Elena, carefully, like walking across ice that looked solid but might not be. She asked about my work, questions that sounded like compliments but carried the weight of disbelief. "You must be so busy with all those contracts. It is remarkable how much responsibility they give you." She said they give you as though the responsibility had been loaned, not earned. Daniil sat beside me and tried to steer the conversation toward safe ground. He talked about the wedding, the weather, a book he had read. Sergei asked me about languages, about whether I had ever been to Vienna, about a German novel he had been meaning to finish. For 45 minutes, the evening almost became bearable. Then dessert arrived, and with it, Elena placed a folder on the table, a plain manila folder, neat, unremarkable. The kind you would use to hold tax documents or a school report. She placed it beside my plate, and she smiled again, that same smile, and she said, "I believe all modern couples should be practical." The room changed temperature. I looked at the folder, I looked at Daniil, he was staring at it like it had appeared out of thin air. He had not known. I could see it in his face. Whatever this was, his mother had done it alone. I opened the folder. Inside was a prenuptial agreement. 14 pages typed, notarized, prepared by a lawyer whose name I recognize from the kind of firm that does not take calls from people like me. And the night before my wedding, sitting at a table set with crystal I did not ask for, wearing earrings from a dead woman who loved me more than anyone alive in that room, except the man beside me, I read the first page and I understood exactly what Elena Viktorovna Orlova thought I was worth. She thought I was worth nothing, and she had the paperwork to prove it. I did not cry. I want you to understand that because it matters, not because crying is weakness. I have cried more times than I can count over things far smaller than this. I cried once because a song came on the radio that my grandmother used to hum while she ironed. I cried in a bathroom stall at work after a client told me my accent was charming, and I knew what he really meant. I have cried into pillows, into scarves, into the shoulder of a man who did not know what to do with my sadness but held me anyway. But that night at that table, With that folder open in front of me and Elena watching my face the way a cat watches something it has cornered, I did not cry, because I knew in the way you know certain things with your whole body and not just your mind, that if I cried she would win, not the argument, the story. She would become the concerned mother who was only trying to protect her family, and I would become the emotional girl who could not handle a practical conversation. So I closed the folder, I placed both hands flat on the table, and I looked at her. "Elena Viktorovna," I said, and my voice was steady, not cold, not shaking, steady. The voice I use in contract negotiations when the other side thinks they have leverage, and I know they do not. Is this conversation about protection, or is it about ownership? She blinked just once. Then she tilted her head with that patient, condescending smile and said, "Mira, darling, I do not think you understand how these things work in families like ours. Families like ours, like I had wandered in off the street. Like I was a guest in their bloodline and should be grateful for the chair." Daniil opened his mouth. I do not know what he was going to say because nothing came out. He sat there with his jaw slightly open, looking from me to his mother to the folder and back again, like a man standing at a crossroads who has forgotten how his legs work. Sergei stared at his plate. He had the expression of someone who had watched this kind of thing happen before and long ago decided that silence was the only armor he could afford. Elena must have taken my quiet for hesitation because she kept going. She explained in that careful voice of hers that the document was standard, that it was not personal, that the Orlov family had certain obligations and assets and expectations, and that clear legal boundaries would prevent any future misunderstanding. She said the word misunderstanding the way someone says infection, like it was something dirty that needed to be contained before it spread. She never once said I was after Daniil's money. She did not need to. Every word she chose said it for her. Then she did something I do not think she planned. Or maybe she did. With Elena, you could never be sure where instinct ended and strategy began. She turned slightly toward the kitchen doorway, where a phone sat on the counter connected to a call, a family friend. Someone named Galina, an older woman I had met once at a birthday gathering, who spoke in that clipped, knowing tone of people who believe they are always the smartest person in any room. Elena switched to German, casually, the way you switch to a language when you assume the person sitting across from you does not speak it. And she said in German, speaking low but not low enough, "Girls without background always become expensive once they secure a surname." The room was very quiet. I heard the clink of Galina's teacup on the other end of the line. I heard the candle nearest me hiss as the wick shifted. I heard Daniil exhale through his nose, though I do not think he understood what his mother had said. His German was passable but slow, the kind learned from textbooks, not from years of reading contracts in Munich and arguing jurisdictional clauses with attorneys in Zurich. But mine was not passable. Mine was flawless. I looked up from the folder. I looked directly at Elena. And in German, without raising my voice, without a single tremor, I said, "Women who built themselves from nothing rarely need rescuing, financing, or permission." Elena's face did not move, but something behind it collapsed. I watched it happen in real time. The mask did not fall, it cracked. Just enough for me to see what was underneath, which was not cruelty. Not in that moment. It was shock. Pure, unfiltered shock because she had made a bet. She had bet that I was exactly the woman she imagined me to be. Unpolished, unaware, easy to manage, and she had just lost. I was not done. I slid the folder back across the table toward her. Still in German, I said, "If financial transparency matters so much to this family, then perhaps we should begin with something I have not yet disclosed." I told her about Vienna. Not the whole story, not the details, just enough. I told her that 1 week ago I was offered a 2-year leadership placement at my firm's European arbitration office. I told her the role included a housing stipend, a language allowance, and a salary that already exceeded Daniil's current annual earnings. I told her I had not yet accepted. I told her I had not told Daniil, and I told her the reason I had kept it to myself was not secrecy. It was that I wanted one honest conversation about it, in my own time, without someone else's fear shaping the outcome. Then I switched back to Russian and said, "I will not discuss marriage in the language of suspicion." Elena said nothing. Sergei's eyes were on the table. His hands were folded in front of him like a man in a church pew who has heard the sermon before and knows it will not save him. And Daniil. Daniil was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It was not anger, not confusion, not admiration. It was the look of a man who has just realized that the woman he loves has been carrying something enormous in complete silence, and that his own silence may have been the reason she felt she had to. I stood up. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table the way you place a period at the end of a sentence. "Thank you for dinner," I said. To all of them, not to Elena specifically, to the room, to the evening, to the version of myself that had walked in hoping for peace and was now walking out holding something heavier. "If Daniil wants a life with me," I said, "it will be one we build as equals, not under supervision," and then I left. I walked past the coat rack and did not take my jacket. I walked past the elevator and took the stairs. I walked out the front door of the building and into the cold, and I kept walking. Not toward home, not toward anything. I walk the way people walk when they need movement to keep from shattering. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because I think people expect this part of the story to feel triumphant. They expect me to say I walked out of that apartment like a woman in a film, shoulders back, music swelling, the whole world rearranging itself to applaud my strength. It did not feel like that. It felt like grief not for Elena. I had never expected to win her approval. I had made peace with that months ago. The way you make peace with weather, you cannot change it. You can only dress for it. What I was grieving as I walked through streets I barely saw was Daniil's silence. He did not say a single word, not when the folder was placed on the table. Not when his mother called me a gold digger in a language she thought I could not understand. Not when I stood up, not when I walked out. He just sat there, frozen, mouth open, like a man watching an accident through a window, too stunned to move, too afraid to choose a side, and I knew, that shock can paralyze people. I knew that family patterns run so deep they become reflexes. I knew that Daniil had spent his entire life surviving his mother by staying quiet, by waiting for her storms to pass, by folding himself into the smallest possible shape so she would not notice he had an opinion. I knew all of that, and I loved him in spite of it. But love without action is just a beautiful idea, and I was done living inside ideas. I walked for over an hour. My feet hurt. The night air had that bitter edge that gets into your bones if you do not have a coat, and I did not have a coat. At some point, I stopped in front of a small cafe that was already closed, its chairs stacked on tables behind the glass, and I stood there looking at my own reflection. I barely recognized myself, not because I looked different, because I felt different, lighter and heavier at the same time. Like something had been removed and something else had settled in its place, something harder and more honest and lonelier than what had been there before. I went home. My apartment was dark and quiet. The wedding dress still hung on the back of the bedroom door. The place cards were still stacked on the kitchen counter. My phone had 11 messages, 3 from Daniil, 6 from my bridesmaid Liza, 2 from my sister. I did not open any of them. I sat on the edge of my bed and I stared at my hands. My grandmother's earrings were still in my ears. I touched one the way I always do when I'm trying to remember who I am underneath everything the world has piled on top of me. Then I pulled the Vienna letter from the back of the drawer where I had hidden it. I unfolded it, I read it again, and I let myself feel what I had not allowed myself to feel all week. I wanted this. Not because of the money, not because of the title, not because it would prove anything to Elena or to anyone else. I wanted it because I had earned it. Because a woman who had studied on buses and in laundromats had been seen by people who knew what excellence looked like, and they had chosen her, me, not my last name, not my family, me. And I realized, sitting there in the dark, that this was the real question the night had handed me. Not whether I could survive Elena. I had already proven that. The question was whether I would enter a marriage carrying someone else's silence on my back. If you are still listening, if this story has settled somewhere in your chest and you're not sure why, go ahead and hit that like button. I promise you what happens next is worth staying for. Around 1:30 in the morning, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Daniil stood in the hallway looking like a man who had aged 5 years in 4 hours. His coat was unbuttoned, his eyes were red but dry, his hands hung at his sides like he did not know what to do with them. He had walked here. I could tell because his shoes were wet and his hair was damp from the cold, and he smelled like night air and exhaustion. "Can I come in?" he said. I stepped aside. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where the place cards for our wedding were stacked in neat little rows, each one written in my handwriting, each one representing someone who would show up tomorrow expecting a celebration. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "I did not know about the prenup." I nodded. I did not know she was going to do that. "I swear to you, Mira, I had no idea." "I believe you," I said, and I did. That was not the problem. "Then why do you look at me like that?" he asked. "Because you sat there," I said. "You sat there and you said nothing." He closed his eyes. "She humiliated me in front of your father. She insulted me in a language she assumed I did not speak. She placed a legal document on the table the night before our wedding and told me, to my face, that I was a financial risk. And you just sat there." I was in shock. "I know. I did not know what to say." "I know that too." He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I could see it. The guilt, not performative guilt, not the kind men wear when they want forgiveness without change, real guilt, the kind that sits on your chest like concrete and makes it hard to breathe. "Mira," he said, "what do I do?" And that is the moment that cracked me open. Not the prenup, not Elena's words in German, not the walk home in the cold without my coat. The man I loved sitting at my kitchen table the night before our wedding, asking me to tell him what to do, because he had never learned how to decide for himself when the person he needed to stand against was the person who raised him. I did not answer his question. Instead, I went to the bedroom. I came back with the Vienna letter. I placed it in front of him the way his mother had placed the prenup in front of me, deliberately, without apology. He read it. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched them stop. I watched them go back to the number and read it again. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. 1 week. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because I wanted one honest conversation about it, without noise, without your mother, without anyone else's fear deciding what it meant." He set the letter down. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "Mira, this is everything you have worked for." "Yes. And you kept it to yourself because you were afraid of what would happen if you said it out loud?" I did not answer. He already knew. He put his head in his hands. He stayed like that for a long time. Then I said the hardest thing I have ever said to someone I love. "Daniil, I love you. I love you and I want to marry you, but I will not walk into a marriage where I have to fight for my own dignity alone. I will not spend the next 30 years translating your silence into something I can live with. I need you to hear me." He looked up. "Tomorrow morning, I will go to the registry office. I will be there at 10. And if you show up, I need you to show up as a man who has chosen his own life, not as your mother's son waiting for permission, not as someone who will apologize later for what he should have prevented now. I need you to show up as my equal, or I need you not to show up at all." I did not say it as a threat. I did not say it with anger. I said it the way you say something that is simply terribly true, the way a doctor says the word they have been avoiding, plainly, without decoration, because the situation has passed the point where gentleness helps. Daniil stood up. He folded the Vienna letter and put it in his coat pocket. He looked at me for a long moment, and in his eyes I saw something I had not seen before. Not the softness I had fallen in love with, not the avoidance I had learned to navigate around. Something new. Something that looked, if I'm being honest, like pain that was finally being allowed to exist instead of being swallowed. He said, "I will be there," and then he left. It was almost dawn. The sky through my window was that bruised gray that comes just before light. I stood in my kitchen surrounded by wedding details that might mean nothing in a few hours. The dress on the door, the rings in their box, the place cards lined up like little soldiers waiting for a war that might not come. I did not sleep. I sat up in the dark and I waited, because the truth is, I did not know if there would be a wedding. I did not know if the man I loved would find, somewhere between his mother's apartment and mine, the version of himself that was strong enough to choose me out loud. And I did not know whether, if he failed, I would survive it. The morning came slowly. the way mornings do when you have not slept and everything depends on what happens next. Liza arrived at 7:15 in the morning. She did not knock. She used the key I had given her 2 years ago when I had the flu and could not get out of bed to open the door for the pharmacy delivery. She let herself in, set a bag of pastries on the counter, looked at my face, and said nothing. That is what real friendship looks like. Not the friend who rushes in with advice and opinions and a plan. The friend who sees that you have been sitting in the same chair since before sunrise with swollen eyes and an untouched glass of water, and who simply starts making coffee. Liza had been my closest friend since we were 22. We met at a translation agency where we were both underpaid and overworked, and she was the only person in the office who did not pretend to like the boss. She was blunt and warm and utterly incapable of lying, even when lying would have been easier. She knew about Elena. She knew about the tension. She did not know about Vienna. She handed me a cup of coffee and sat across from me at the table. The place cards were still there, the rings in their box, the wedding dress on the bedroom door untouched, like a ghost of a woman I was not sure I would become today. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "No." "Did he come?" "Yes, last night." And I looked at her. I told him everything. The prenup, the Vienna offer, what I need from him. What did he say? He said he would be there. Liza was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you believe him?" And I said, "Honestly, I do not know." She nodded. She did not try to convince me either way. She did not say he would come. She did not say he would not. She just stood up and said, "Then we get you dressed. And if he shows up, you will be ready. And if he does not, you will still be the most beautiful woman in that building. And we will go eat dumplings and get drunk and figure out the rest tomorrow." I almost smiled. Getting dressed for a wedding when you do not know if there will be one is a strange kind of ceremony. Liza helped me with the buttons, the small hooks at the back that I could not reach. She pinned my hair with a steadiness that I did not have in my own hands. She did my eyeliner when my fingers would not stop trembling. We did not talk about Daniil. We did not talk about Elena. We talked about nothing and everything. She told me about a terrible date she had been on the week before, a man who had ordered for her at dinner without asking, and then spent 40 minutes talking about cryptocurrency. I laughed. Not a big laugh, but enough to remind my body that it still knew how. She fastened my grandmother's earrings. "There," she said, stepping back. "Now you look like you." I looked in the mirror and I saw a woman in a white dress that she had chosen herself, paid for herself, fitted herself into without anyone's help. And I thought, whatever happens today, this woman is not small. This woman was never small. She was just quiet, and quiet is not the same thing as weak. We left the apartment at 9:20. The registry hall was a pale stone building in the center of the city, modest, functional. Not the kind of place that ends up in magazines, but the kind of place where real lives get joined together by real decisions. I liked it for that reason. Elena had wanted a cathedral. I had wanted honesty. We compromised on architecture, which is how most wedding planning works when the families involved disagree on what marriage actually means. When we arrived, guests were already gathering in the foyer. Small clusters of people speaking quietly, the way people do when they can sense that something is not quite right but do not yet know what. My sister was there, a few friends from work, 2 of Daniil's university friends who looked uncomfortable in their suits. Sergei arrived alone. I saw him come through the door, tall and slightly stooped, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been pressed that morning with military precision. He saw me across the foyer and came straight to me. He took both my hands. He did not say anything about the night before. He did not apologize for his wife. He just squeezed my hands and said, "You look like your grandmother today." He had met her once, at an early dinner, before Elena had made her position clear, back when there was still a possibility that this family could function like a family. My grandmother had spoken to Sergei for an hour about books, and he had listened the way he always listened, with his whole self, quietly, attentively, like a man who understood that the best conversations happen when someone finally stops performing. I squeezed his hands back. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it for more than the compliment. Elena came 20 minutes later. She walked in the way she always walked into rooms. Spine straight, chin lifted, dressed in slate blue silk with a pearl brooch that I knew had been her mother's. She was elegant. I will give her that. She was always elegant in the way that expensive armor is elegant, beautiful on the outside, designed to keep everything out. She did not look at me. She went directly to a seat in the second row and sat down and folded her hands in her lap and became still. The kind of still that tells everyone nearby not to approach. I checked the time. 9:48. No Daniil. 9:51. 9:54. Liza stood beside me. She did not say a word. She just placed her hand on the small of my back, a pressure so light I almost did not feel it, but enough to remind me that I was not standing alone. 9:57. I thought about what it would feel like to turn around, to walk out of this building and go home and take off this dress and sit at my kitchen table and accept the Vienna position and leave the country and begin again in a city where no one knew my name and no one had ever made me feel like I was not enough. I thought about how that life might look clean, quiet, mine, and then the door opened. Daniil walked in at 9:59, 1 minute before the registrar was scheduled to begin. He was wearing a dark suit I had never seen before. His shoes were polished, his hair was combed back but already falling across his forehead the way it always did, because some things about a person are permanent no matter how carefully they prepare. His face was pale, his jaw was set, and his eyes found me the moment he crossed the threshold, like I was the only fixed point in a room full of moving things. He did not greet the guests, he did not shake hands, he did not stop at his mother's row, he walked directly to me, straight down the center of the foyer past everyone with the kind of focus that comes not from confidence but from a decision that has already cost you something. He stopped in front of me, and then in a voice loud enough for both families to hear, he said what he had come to say. This morning at 7 I called a lawyer. I had the prenuptial agreement formally rejected and returned. It no longer exists. He paused. I also called my mother. I told her that if she cannot speak to my wife with respect, she will have no role in the way we build our life. I did not ask her to agree. I told her how it would be. Alina's expression did not change, but her hands tightened in her lap, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. Daniil took a breath. He was not performing. That is what made it land. There was no rehearsed quality to his words, no dramatic pause for effect. He was simply a man saying out loud, for the first time in his life, what he should have said a long time ago. "Mira," he said, and his voice dropped lower so that this part was for me, even though everyone could hear it. "I sat in that chair last night and I let my mother insult you. I did not speak, I did not move. And I have spent every hour since then understanding what that silence cost." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The Vienna letter. "If you still want me," he said, "I will go with you. Wherever this leads, I will figure it out as I go. I do not have a plan yet. I do not have answers, but I know this. I am not following you. I am choosing my marriage, and I am choosing it right now in front of everyone, because you deserved that from me last night and I failed." The foyer was so quiet, I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I looked at him for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to see whether the thing I had asked for, really asked for, was actually there. Not a grand gesture, not a speech, not perfection, just separation, real separation, between the man he had been inside his mother's house and the man he was choosing to become inside his own life. And I saw it. Not in his words, which were good, but words are easy. I saw it in his hands, which were shaking, in his eyes, which were steady despite the shaking, in the way he did not glance once at Elena, not to seek her approval, not to check her reaction. He was looking only at me. I took his hand and I felt his whole body exhale. We married that afternoon. The ceremony was brief. The registrar read the standard words and we said the standard things and we signed where we were told to sign, and it was ordinary in every possible way. No string quartet, no readings from poets, no slow motion kiss with rose petals drifting. Just two people standing across from each other in a pale stone room, choosing it, even though the night before had cracked everything wide open. Choosing it not because the crack had healed, but because they both decided it was worth repairing. That is what marriage is, not the absence of damage. The decision to stay in the room after the damage is done. If you're still here, still listening, still carrying this story with you, hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment. I mean that I read every single one. Now let me tell you what happened after the vows, because the wedding was not the hard part. The hard part was everything that came next. The reception was smaller than planned. Several of Elena's guests did not attend, which told me she had made phone calls that morning. I did not care. The people who mattered were there. Liza, my sister, Daniil's 2 friends, Sergey, a handful of colleagues, and Elena, who sat at the far end of the table and spoke to almost no one. There was food and wine, and someone made a toast that I cannot remember. And then Sergey stood up. He was not a man who enjoyed attention. He held his glass with both hands, like he was steadying it against something internal. And he said in that quiet, careful voice of his, "A marriage does not survive on the agreement of parents. It survives on the courage to disappoint them when necessary." He looked at Daniil when he said it. Then he looked at me, and then, very briefly, he looked at Elena. She did not meet his eyes. I do not know what passed between them in that glance. I do not know what conversations happened in that apartment after I left the night before, or what Sergey said to his wife when their son called at 7 in the morning to reject the document she had prepared behind everyone's back. But I know this: Sergey Petrovich was not a weak man. He was a tired man, and there is a difference. Weakness does not know what is right. Tiredness knows exactly what is right and has simply run out of the energy to say it. That toast was him saying it finally publicly, at the only moment that mattered. I loved him for that. Daniil did not leave my side for the rest of the evening. Not in a possessive way, in the way of a man who had almost lost something and was still adjusting to the fact that he had not. He held my hand under the table. He refilled my glass before it was empty. He introduced me to every person who approached us as my wife with a kind of deliberate weight, like the words were new and he wanted to practice the feel of them. That night, alone in our apartment, we did not talk about the future. We did not talk about Vienna. We did not talk about Elena. We just lay in the dark, side by side, holding hands, 2 people who had survived a night that could have ended everything and were now resting in the strange, exhausted calm that follows a storm. The next weeks were not calm, they were chaos. Once the decision about Vienna was spoken, it became real, and real things have weight. Daniil could not simply transfer his consulting work. His contracts were domestic. His network was local. His credentials, which were excellent, did not translate as cleanly to the Austrian market as either of us had hoped. He began making calls, sending emails, reaching out to contacts who might know someone who might know someone. Some responded. Most did not. I gave my notice at the firm's home office and began the relocation process. There were housing forms and visa paperwork and insurance transfers and 100 small bureaucratic tasks that each took 3 times longer than they should have. Claudia was generous with time and support, but the firm expected me in Vienna within 6 weeks. 6 weeks to dismantle an entire life and rebuild it in a country where I knew the language but not the rhythms. And then there was Elena. She did not come to see us off. She sent a message to Daniil, 4 words, "I hope you're sure?" He did not respond. Sergey came to the airport. He brought a bag of dried apricots, because my grandmother had once told him they were good for long journeys, and he had remembered. He hugged his son for a long time. He shook my hand, then changed his mind and hugged me too. He said, "Take care of each other." That is all there is. We landed in Vienna on a Tuesday. The apartment the firm had helped arrange was small, bright, and expensive. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, a window that overlooked a courtyard where pigeons gathered in the mornings like a committee that never accomplished anything. We unpacked boxes for 3 days. We argued about where to put the bookshelf. We ate cold sandwiches sitting on the floor because the table had not been delivered yet. And for a few weeks it was beautiful. The novelty of it, the foreignness, walking to the bakery in the morning and ordering in German, finding the tram route to my office, learning which market stalls gave extra herbs if you spoke to the owner in her dialect instead of standard German. Everything felt new, and newness has a way of disguising the cracks underneath. But cracks do not disappear because you change your address. They follow you, they wait. My work began at full speed. The European Arbitration Office was demanding in ways I had not fully anticipated. The cases were complex, multilingual, layered with jurisdictional nuance. My colleagues were sharp and precise and expected the same from me without a grace period. I worked long hours. I came home tired in a way that lived in my bones, not just my eyes. But I was good at it. I was becoming indispensable, and I knew it, and the knowing carried me through the exhaustion the way fuel carries an engine, even when the frame is rattling. Daniil was not carried. He tried. I need you to know that he tried hard, in the quiet, unglamorous way that people try when the world is not watching and there is no applause at the end of the effort. He reached out to financial consultancies in Vienna. He offered remote services to his old clients back home. He studied Austrian compliance standards. He went to networking events where he stood in corners holding lukewarm wine, trying to explain his qualifications to people who smiled politely and never called back. He lost his first remote contract within a month. A client he had worked with for 3 years told him apologetically that the time zone difference was making things difficult. Then a second client reduced their hours. Then a third went silent entirely. And slowly, so slowly that neither of us noticed at first, the balance between us shifted. I was rising, he was sinking. I came home with stories about breakthroughs and deadlines met, and colleagues who respected my judgment. He came home with silence. With long afternoons spent in a foreign apartment alone, while the woman he had crossed an ocean for became someone the city was already beginning to recognize. He started getting quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a man at rest, the tight, careful quiet of a man who is ashamed and does not want you to see it. He stopped asking about my day. He started going to bed before I got home. He became irritable about small things, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the fact that I forgot to buy milk, the sound my laptop made when I typed late at night in the living room. And I, because I'm not perfect, because I was exhausted and overwhelmed and trying so hard to prove myself in a job that would not slow down for anyone, I pretended not to notice. I told myself he needed time. I told myself he was adjusting. I told myself that if I just kept working, kept succeeding, kept building this life for both of us, he would eventually find his footing and everything would balance out. I was wrong, because the pressure in our marriage was no longer coming from Elena. It was no longer coming from the outside, it was coming from the space between us. The gap where one person is needed and the other feels unnecessary. The silence where honesty should have been. The slow, corrosive shame of a man who left everything behind for love and is beginning to wonder if love was enough. One night, we had a fight, not about anything real, about groceries, about a missed phone call, about a utility bill that had come in German and he could not read it fast enough, and I had corrected his translation without thinking. The way you correct a small mistake when you are tired and do not realize you have just made someone feel like a child in their own kitchen. He put the bill down on the counter. He stood very still. And then he said something that broke my heart in a way Elena never could. I crossed an ocean, he said, and I'm afraid I came here just to become a background character in your life. I stared at him, and the worst part was, I could not tell him he was wrong. Because I had been so focused on not failing, so focused on earning the opportunity, so focused on proving that the girl without a background could thrive in a city that did not owe her anything, that I had stopped looking at the man standing right beside me. I had stopped asking how he was, really asking, not the polite version, the real one. And he had stopped telling me, because he did not want to be the thing that slowed me down. We did not go to bed that night. We stood in that kitchen, and we stayed. That is the part people do not tell you about marriage. The staying, not the vows, not the rings, not the ceremony where everyone watches you promise things you do not yet understand. The real marriage happens at 11:40 on a Tuesday night when you're both too tired to be kind and too honest to keep pretending, and you choose to stay in the room instead of walking to opposite corners of the apartment and letting the silence harden into something permanent. Daniil said it again, quieter this time. I am afraid I came here just to become a background character in your life. And I said the thing I had been holding for weeks, maybe longer. I have been terrified, I said, of sounding ungrateful for this job, for this city, for this chance, so I have been pretending not to notice how lonely you are. Because if I noticed, I would have to do something about it, and I did not know how to do something about it without making you feel worse. He looked at me. You knew, he said. Of course I knew, Daniil. I know you. I know what your silence sounds like when it is peaceful, and I know what it sounds like when it is not. I have known for weeks. I just did not know how to say it without it sounding like pity. And I knew pity would break you faster than anything. He sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, just the slow, heavy way a person sits when their legs decide they are done holding the weight. I sat down next to him. The tile was cold. The light above us buzzed the way cheap apartment lights do, the kind of sound you stop hearing until everything else goes quiet. I do not need you to fix this for me, he said. I need you to stop pretending it is not happening. Okay, I said, and I need to stop pretending I am fine when I am not, okay? And I need you to let me be angry sometimes, not at you, just angry at the situation, at the fact that my credentials do not matter here. At the fact that I left everything I knew and some mornings I wake up and I do not know what I am supposed to do with the day. You can be angry, I said. Just be angry in the same room as me, not behind a closed door. He was quiet for a while, then he said, I think I have been punishing you for being successful, not on purpose. But I think some part of me resented it. Resented that you fit here, and I do not. Resented that you found your place, and I am still looking for mine. I know, I said, and I think some part of me has been performing strength so hard that I forgot how to need you, and when you do not feel needed, you disappear. And when you disappear, I work harder, and we just keep spinning. He turned to look at me. So how do we stop? We stop right now, I said. Right here, on this floor, we start again. He almost smiled, not quite, but almost, on the kitchen floor. On the kitchen floor. And we did. Not in some grand cinematic way. Not with a speech or a plan or a revelation that fixed everything overnight. We started again the way you actually start things, slowly, clumsily, with more honesty than grace. The next morning, Daniil sat at our small table with a cup of coffee and a laptop, and he searched for German language certification courses in bookkeeping and financial compliance. Not because I told him to, because somewhere between the kitchen floor and sunrise, he decided that waiting for his old career to find him in a new country was not a strategy. It was a delay. He found a program, an 8-month intensive course taught in German, designed for professionals relocating to the Austrian market. It was rigorous. It was humbling. He would be the oldest person in the class by almost a decade, and the tuition was not cheap. I want to do this, he said, but I need you to know it means I will not be earning anything for 8 months. You will be carrying us financially. I looked at him across that table and I said, you carried me through every dinner with your mother for 2 years. You sat in rooms where I was insulted, and even when you did not speak up, you drove me home. You held my hand, you stayed. Carrying someone is not always about money. I can do this part. He enrolled that week, and something shifted, not in him, exactly in us. Because the moment we stopped pretending the imbalance did not exist, it stopped being a threat and became something we could actually manage. He went to class, he studied at the kitchen table while I worked late. He came home frustrated and overwhelmed and sometimes defeated, and instead of hiding it, he told me, and I listened. Not with solutions, just with presence. The way he had once listened to me, I changed too. I stopped treating my exhaustion like a performance. I stopped coming home and immediately proving how hard my day had been, as though fatigue were a competition and I needed to win. I asked him for help, small things at first, picking up prescriptions, handling the landlord about a leaking pipe, translating a letter from the building association that I could have read myself but chose to hand to him because sometimes being needed is more important than being efficient. He started cooking dinner, not because I asked, because he discovered that the market 3 blocks from our apartment had a vegetable vendor who reminded him of his grandfather, and he began going there on Thursday afternoons and coming home with bags of whatever looked good and making things I had never tasted before. Soups, mostly. He became obsessed with soup. Every Sunday there was a new one. Some were excellent, some were terrible. One involved beets and something he would not identify, and I ate the entire bowl because his face while he watched me eat it was worth every strange mouthful. That soup became our Sunday, our ordinary thing. This small, unremarkable ritual that marriages are actually built on. Not grand gestures, not speeches in registry halls. Soup on Sundays and someone who notices when you're quiet. Months passed. Daniil finished his certification. He did not graduate at the top of his class, but he graduated, and I was there, and I clapped louder than anyone, and he looked at me from across the room with that expression that has not changed since the first day I met him, the one that makes me feel like nothing else exists. He began building something, slowly, carefully. He started consulting for immigrant-run businesses, small operations owned by people who had come to Austria from somewhere else and were drowning in compliance paperwork they could not read and could not afford to get wrong. He understood them, not just their ledgers, their fear, the terror of building something in a country that does not owe you anything, where one misfiled form can cost you everything you have worked for. He was good at it, quietly, steadily, unmistakably good. His client list grew, his German improved. He began to be recommended by word of mouth, which is the only kind of reputation that actually matters, and I watched the man I married come back to himself. Not the version his mother had shaped, not the version that froze at dinner tables when the wrong thing was said, a new version. One that had been broken open by failure and rebuilt by choice. That is the version I fell in love with twice. Meanwhile, back home, Elena's silence hardened into distance. She wrote to Daniil occasionally, short messages, clipped, the kind that say nothing while making sure you know the sender is still watching. She did not write to me at all. I did not expect her to. I had stopped expecting anything from Elena the night I walked out of her apartment without my coat. Expectation is just disappointment wearing a nicer dress. Then, about 7 months after we moved to Vienna, Sergei had a health scare. It was not catastrophic. A minor cardiac event, the kind that sounds minor only to people who have not stood in a hospital corridor waiting for news. He was treated, monitored, stabilized. But it frightened everyone, including Elena, who for perhaps the first time in her life was confronted with the possibility that the man who had spent decades quietly absorbing her storms might not always be there to absorb them. Daniil wanted to fly home immediately. I told him to go, but before he left, I did something I did not have to do and no one asked me to do. I called my firm's insurance coordinator and asked about international specialist referrals. Within 2 days, I had connected Sergei with a cardiologist affiliated with our company's European network, a doctor in Munich who reviewed his case and recommended a follow-up protocol his local physicians had not considered. I did not do it for Elena. I did it for Sergei because he had brought dried apricots to the airport and once told me I looked like my grandmother. I did it for Daniil because his father's health mattered to him and therefore it mattered to me. And maybe, somewhere underneath, I did it because I wanted to prove to myself that I was not the kind of woman who withholds generosity just because she has been treated badly. Elena found out. Of course she did, and whatever she felt about it, she did not say, not then. But 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at our apartment. Not a message on a phone, a letter, handwritten on cream-colored paper in an envelope addressed to Mira Orlova, my married name. The first time she had ever used it. I opened it, standing in the kitchen, next to the window where the pigeons gathered. Daniil was at work, I was alone. The letter was not long. Elena did not beg for forgiveness. She did not apologize in the way people apologize when they want to be released from guilt without actually changing. She did not say she was wrong. She said something harder. She said she had mistaken control for care. She said she had confused status with safety. She said she had spent so many years protecting what she thought her family needed that she had failed to notice what her family actually was. She said the prenup was not Daniil's idea, and it was not a lawyer's idea. It was hers. She had commissioned it alone, paid for it alone, and placed it on that table alone. And she had done it because she was frightened. Not of me, she wrote, of becoming irrelevant. I read that line 3 times. I stood in my kitchen in Vienna, 7 months and 1,000 miles from the night that almost ended my marriage before it began, and I read a sentence written by a woman who had spent my entire engagement trying to make me feel like I did not belong, and I felt something I did not expect. I felt sorry for her. Not the kind of sorry that excuses what she did, not the kind that rewrites history into something softer than it was. The kind of sorry you feel when you recognize a wound in someone else that you have carried yourself. The fear of being left behind, the terror that the people you love will outgrow you. The desperate, clumsy, destructive things people do when they cannot say out loud that they are afraid. Elena was afraid. She had been afraid from the very beginning, and instead of saying so, she had built a fortress out of cruelty and called it protection. I did not write back immediately. I let the letter sit on the counter for 4 days. I read it again. I thought about what to say, and then I wrote back not a long letter, just a few lines in which I said that I did not need an apology. I needed honesty, and her letter was the first honest thing she had ever given me. I also said that love was never the problem between us. Possession was. At Christmas, Daniil and I flew home for the first time. I will not pretend it was easy. The reunion was awkward in the way that all necessary things are awkward. Elena met us at the door. She was thinner than I remembered, older around the eyes. She kissed Daniil on both cheeks and held him for a moment too long, the way mothers do when they are afraid their children have grown beyond reach. Then she turned to me. She did not hug me. She was not there yet, but she looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her, her eyes did not carry that appraising quality, that measuring. She simply looked at me like a person. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did for Sergei. He is family," I said. She nodded, and that was enough. For now, the visit lasted 4 days. It was not warm, it was not hostile, it was human, this strange, uncomfortable, necessary process of people learning to be in the same room without armor. Sergei was recovering well. He showed me his garden, which had become his project during his recovery, and told me the names of every plant as though they were old friends he was introducing me to on the 3rd evening. Elena and I ended up alone in the kitchen. It was not planned. Daniil and Sergei had gone for a walk. I was making tea. She came in and stood by the counter, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I was frightened from the beginning, not of you, of losing him." I set down the kettle. "You were not losing him," I said. "You were pushing him away. There is a difference." She was quiet. "I did not come into your family to take anything," I said. "I came because I love your son, and I would have loved your family too if you had let me." She looked at her hands, and then in hesitant, effortful, imperfect German, she said something that stopped me where I stood. She said she had started taking German lessons. Because if my world was now part of Daniil's life, she said, she would rather learn it than keep insulting what she did not understand. I looked at this woman who had placed a prenup on the table the night before my wedding, who had called me a girl without background in a language she thought I could not speak, who had spent years treating me like a threat to be managed rather than a person to be known, and I saw her trying, not succeeding, not transformed, not suddenly warm or welcoming or easy, just trying, in the clumsy, painful, insufficient way that people try when they have run out of pride and have nothing left but the willingness to begin. That was the first real bridge between us. I did not cross it all at once. Neither did she. We are still on it, honestly. Some days it holds, some days it sways, but it is there, and we are both still walking, and that is more than I expected the night I left her apartment without my coat. The second year in Vienna changed everything. Daniil's business stabilized. He had steady clients, a growing reputation, and the quiet confidence of a man who had built something from nothing in a country that owed him nothing. I understood that feeling. I had lived inside it my entire life. Watching him discover it for himself was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. I was promoted to lead cross-border case strategy at the firm. The role was enormous and exhausting and exactly what I had spent my career preparing for. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it, and for the first time, I did not feel guilty about knowing we learned the city. We learned which cafe had the best coffee and which tram to avoid in the rain. We learned which bakery gave an extra roll if you came in right before closing, and which park bench had the best view of the river on autumn evenings when the light turned everything gold. We learned how to argue without letting outsiders into the center of our marriage. We learned that disagreement is not betrayal, that silence is only dangerous when it replaces honesty, that a marriage does not need to be effortless to be good, it just needs two people who keep choosing each other, even on the days when choosing is hard. Soup on Sundays, coffee by the window, his hand on my back when we walked through the market. My head on his shoulder on the tram home. The ordinary things, the things that do not make stories but make lives. Then another offer came, a permanent executive track position. 3 more years abroad, minimum, more responsibility, more money, more distance from everything we had left behind. This time, I did not hide the letter in a drawer. I brought it home and I set it on the kitchen table, the same table where we had sorted bills and language homework and eaten terrible soup, and once sat on the floor at midnight and decided to start over. I want to decide this together, I said, and we did not because ambition mattered more than family, but because we had finally built a family that could survive movement, a family that did not require anyone to stay small, so someone else could feel safe. We said yes. 4 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I took the test on a Wednesday morning while Daniil was at a client meeting. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at the result for a very long time, and I felt something I had not felt since the day Claudia slid the Vienna offer across her desk. Recognition, the feeling of being chosen by your own life. I told Daniil that evening. I handed him the test the way I hand him everything that matters, directly, without ceremony. He looked at it, he looked at me, and then he sat down very slowly, like the ground had shifted beneath him and he needed a moment to find his balance. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Are you?" I said. "I am terrified," he said. And yes, more than I have ever been. We told Sergey and Elena over a video call the following weekend. Sergey smiled immediately, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes and does not stop. He said, "Well, it is about time." And then he laughed, and it was the warmest sound I had heard from that family in years. Elena did not speak right away. She looked at the screen, she looked at Daniil, she looked at me, and then she began to cry. Not the tears I had seen from her before, the controlled strategic kind, the ones designed to make a room shift in her direction. These were different. These were the tears of a woman who had spent years gripping her family so tightly she nearly crushed it, and who was now watching it grow in spite of everything she had done. She asked, very softly, whether I would let her knit something for the baby. I said yes, and I meant it. This is where I will leave you, not because the story is over, but because the part that matters is already told. I did not win by humiliating Elena. Daniil did not grow because he made one brave speech in a registry hall. Elena did not change because someone defeated her. We all changed because life, real life, the kind that does not care about your plans or your pride, forced each of us to choose between control and love, between fear and respect, between the version of ourselves that other people built and the version we had the courage to become. I'm sitting in my apartment in Vienna. The tram is running outside. The pigeons are in the courtyard. There is a half-finished pair of tiny knitted socks on my kitchen counter, sent in a package that arrived last Tuesday, wrapped in tissue paper, with no note because Elena is still learning how to say things without words getting in the way. My grandmother's earrings are in a small dish by the bathroom mirror. I still wear them into every room that tries to make me feel small. There are fewer of those rooms now than there used to be. Daniil is in the other room on the phone with a client explaining Austrian tax obligations in the patient, steady voice that I fell in love with in a conference hall in Frankfurt a lifetime ago. I am not the woman I was the night I walked out of that dinner without my coat. I am not the woman who sat on the edge of her bed at 2 a.m. wondering if there would be a wedding. I am not the woman who stood in a registry hall at 9:57 watching the door, not breathing. I am someone who was made by all of those women, shaped by every silence I refused to accept and every room I walked into wearing nothing but my own name. My grandmother used to say that a woman's life is not a single story. It is a series of doors. Some you open yourself, some are opened for you. And some you have to build from nothing, with your own hands in the dark because no one thought to leave one for you. I have built a few doors in my time. The next one is a nursery.